Penn State football is back home on a windy, wet afternoon. After all, it is fall in Happy Valley. It won't be an easy afternoon on the quarterbacks. Maryland's sneaky good offense is led by Talia Tagovailoa. We'll break down one of the Big Ten's top passers. Plus, it's bowl predicting season, and can you believe it? If it all ended today, Penn State would be heading to Pasadena. Believe it or not, we'll discuss the most recent projections coming up, plus Joe Nastasi and his son chasing perfection, how football has bonded the former Nittany Lion with his son, both on and off the field. The 7-2 Nittany Lions are still chasing big things here in 2022, and while a Big Ten championship is off the table, the season is anything but done. Let's get you ready for Penn State and Maryland right here on Nittany Nation Game Day. We've officially reached the home stretch in the Penn State season. Just 3 games remain. Welcome inside the Nittany Nation studio. I'm Andrew Clay. She is Anderly Penwell and AP. Bowl season is heating up and the projections are here. And if the year ended today, believe it or not, Penn State would be in the Rose Bowl.
Headed to Pasadena. Penn State's Rose Bowl aspirations are more tied to what happens with the Michigan and Ohio State rather than what the Nittany Lions actually do. Now that Rose Bowl slot is open because if the season ended today, Ohio State and Michigan would both make the college football playoffs. Whether or not that will happen is still yet to be seen. Still, there are a number of New Year's 6 projections for Penn State. The Action Network has the team in the Orange Bowl, and they're also linked to the Cotton and Citrus Bowl. Penn State, of course, still has to win first, and even so, Penn State's resume isn't exactly strong. It's void of really any marquee wins.
It's interesting because you got some teams and some programs that have not been consistent but have big-time wins, and then you have others that have been consistent but not the signature win. And obviously what you want is you want both.
If you look at Penn State's best wins, it's not great. Penn State has no current wins over a Power 5 team that currently has a winning conference record. Though there is a chance both Purdue and Minnesota look pretty good at year's end. Purdue could beat Illinois this weekend and win out and go 8-4, while Minnesota could finish 9-3. The Golden Gophers will be favored down the stretch in their remaining games. Of course, to even think about a Rose Bowl, Penn State has to win out, and Maryland is no pushover today.
The Terrapins are 6-3 coming into this one, with Tua Tagovailoa back and better than ever. Maryland's offense certainly has promise.
I didn't know Tua was playing for
Talia.
Maryland.
Little brother. Wrong one.
Talia Tagovailoa is Tua's younger brother, and he's missed some time with a knee injury returning last week. It was a dreadful performance where he had a season low in yards and completion percentage and rating and was just sacked a season high 5 times. Still, he's 3rd in the Big Ten in completion percentage and 4th in yards per game and has thrown for 300 yards 3 times.
Talia has been pretty good throwing for his career, throwing for over 7,000 yards. He's got 48 touchdowns to 24 picks, and he will be Maryland's all-time leader in touchdowns and yards by season's end.
He threw almost 400 yards against the Nittany Lions last year. Don't forget that.
We've done a nice job under really challenging circumstances.
Well, Penn State's offensive line continues to improve week in and week out, but injuries continue to be an issue. This week, Coach Franklin officially listed Olu Fashanu as week to week and said he's hopeful Caden Wallace returns, but no guarantee. Earlier this week, Penn State also announced Landon Tangwell would miss the rest of the year. That likely means more Drew Shelton, the true freshman, who started on Saturday.
I joke around with him and Venga. They were way ahead of where I was as a freshman. And to be able to step in like that in a game where we needed him, and he played really well. As a true freshman, like you said, it's hard to do. And I expect big things from him as we go on.
Typically with offensive linemen, if you're not talking about them, that's a good thing. And we've been very impressed with them. We'd still like to redshirt them if we could, but I don't know if that will be feasible.
Now staying with the O-line for a second, Cornell transfer Hunter Norzad announced this week he will return for his extra COVID year. He started 4 games this season. Franklin characterized the status of both linebackers Curtis Jacobs and Tyler Elston as game-time decisions this week, and Penn State bumps up to number 14 in this week's CFP rankings. And remember, you can always keep up to date with all things Nittany Nation using the Nittany Nation app, that QR code on your screen. You can use that to download the latest news, scores, and stats right there on your phone.
When we come back, we'll revisit last week's win and talk about how the defensive line put in one of its best performances of the season.
Plus, Ryan Risky with a look at how a former Nittany Lion and his son have used football as their bond both on and off the field.
You're watching Nittany Nation Game Day.
A week ago, Penn State left little doubt in a 45-14 win over Indiana, Penn State's 4th victory this year by 4 or more scores. Katron Allen rushed for 3 scores, compiling 158 yards from scrimmage, his 6th, 7th, and 8th touchdowns of the season. Both Allen and Nick Singleton now have tied the freshman rushing touchdown record at 8. And early in that win, we saw the Nittany Lions generate one of their best pass rushes of the year, getting to the Hoosiers quarterbacks 6 times.
What is maybe most impressive about that stat is that 5 of those 6 sacks were recorded by defensive linemen, a unit that only accounted for 8 sacks prior to that Indiana game. The Nittany Lions will have a chance to repeat that performance this week. Maryland has struggled to protect its quarterbacks against Big Ten opponents, and at least one player has a little extra motivation this week for Penn State, and that's Chop Robinson. The sophomore was a 5-star commit to Maryland out of high school and then transferred to Penn State this offseason. He carved out a role as a starter in Manny Diaz's defense and picked up a sack last week against Indiana.
He's very similar to AK, just that initial burst that he has. He's very quick. He's getting great with using his hands. He's gonna be a phenomenal player.
He's put a lot of pressure on the quarterback. He hasn't necessarily made the sacks, but he's had some TFLs and he's had good pressure on the quarterback. So I think, as far as the defensive linemen are concerned, he's probably had the biggest impact.
Second voice there was former Penn State defensive end Steve Smear. He was our guest last week on Nittany Nation Overtime. Remember, you can catch that show weekly on WTAJ in Altoona and State College, or you can listen to the podcast, which drops Monday morning. And let's look around the Big Ten this week. All of them early games. Number 2, Ohio State hosting Indiana at noon. Purdue travels to Champaign to take on number 21, Illinois. And Penn State's next 2 opponents, Rutgers and Michigan State, square off from East Lansing. And then it's number 3, Michigan at home against Nebraska. Former Nittany Lion receiver Joe Nastasi has been around football for a long time, but this year might be one of his favorite seasons.
Yeah, he's an assistant for the undefeated State College High Little Lions, who are chasing a state championship. But Ryan Risky reports that what makes this season so special is that Joe gets to chase this title with his son by his side.
He was a ball boy in flip-flops for a long time, so it's always kind of been a joke. We'd show up in Crocs and flip-flops all the time and was a ball boy when he was just so big, and you turn around, he's a senior.
Football is a bond that Joe Nastasi shares with both of his sons. Joe Jr. graduated in 2020, and now Dante, who is a senior this year.
I mean, it is great having my dad as my coach. He's been my coach for pretty much all my life, since flag football to youth to middle school to high school. It's pretty much great. He's not just my football coach. He's a coach as a man too.
Joe played wide receiver at Penn State, and perhaps his greatest moment on the field was in Penn State's Outback Bowl win over Kentucky.
If I run like this, he got the angle. You're chasing me this way. What I want to do is press one, freeze him.
Now, as the wide receivers coach at State High, he's passing down that skill set to Dante.
The coaching part of it is that I coach him on and off the field, and maybe sometimes a little too much. When we're at the house, we're working on a route or this or that. So as an individual, he gets a little bit more coaching because we're coaching on the ride home, on the ride back to school, at the dinner table.
Dante leads the Little Lions with 40 receptions and is second with 478 yards. Like his dad, he wears 21, a number that has significant meaning to his family.
Because of my dad, because he really inspires me when he was playing in college, and also because of my 21. My mom was born December 21st, And yeah, that's why we're 21.
Nastasi graduated from Penn State in 1999 and had a brief stint in the NFL. When his playing days ended, Joe settled in State College, where he now finds joy in giving back to the community.
I've enjoyed every minute of it, like you said, not just with my sons, but you really have how many sons out here on a team? You're 70 of them, and that's really the rewarding part. I mean, we're all out here giving a lot of time to it, but to see the kids and have the success, it really is rewarding.
Reporting for your Nittany Nation, I'm Ryan Risky.
And with a win on Thursday night, State College stays undefeated and advances to the state tournament.
And they're holding 3 of their last 4 opponents to single digits, so advancing looks pretty likely for the good Nittany Lions.
Good season for the Little Lions. When we come back, I go 1-1 as we break down the Terps.
But first, Joe Murgo has your game day forecast.
Hey guys, November games can have rough weather. I don't think this will be a bad November game, but it's not going to be comfortable. We are going to have a chilly wind. There is a shower possibility by the time we have that 3:30 kickoff. Temperatures are going to be near the 50-degree mark. It'll start milder earlier in the day, and some gust of wind could be close to 40, especially in the early part of the game. During the rest of the game, bring the rain gear and also the hat and gloves. We are going to have some showers. Temperatures are going to be dropping off to near 40 by the end of the game, and that wind's going to make it feel colder than that. So it's not our most comfortable game. I don't think it'll rain heavy all the time, but I would be prepared.
You're watching Nittany Nation Game Day.
Back here on Nittany Nation Game Day, Penn State getting ready to take on the Maryland Terrapins. And to help preview and talk about the Terrapins, we have Alex Flum from DC News Now, one of the stations that carries this show each week. Alex, I appreciate you coming on. The first question I want to ask you about is Taulia Tagovailoa. He is this Maryland quarterback. He's electric. Some argue he's the second best quarterback in the Big Ten. He's healthy now. How important is that to the Terps moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, there's no question Taulia kind of carries this offense. There's a lot of firepower in some of the skill positions, but it all starts and ends with Taulia. As good as he's going to be, that's probably as good as this offense is going to be. They have their backup, Billy Edwards Jr., stepped in and has played well, but he's just not the same as Taulia. He did come back against Wisconsin last week. It was hard to tell if his play was impacted by the crazy weather conditions or the fact that maybe he isn't fully healthy, but it is expected that he could likely be taking even further of a step and looking even more healthy this week against Penn State.
It was a windy week last week in the Big Ten. I don't care what school you were at. It was a windy one. One of the things about Taulia, his best receiver, the star of this offense probably, Raheem Jarrett. I know he is questionable heading into this matchup. How important is he to Maryland's passing game, and what do they do if he can't go?
Yeah, well, Jarrett is kind of the top receiver in this offense. 2 other guys, Dante Demas and Jayshon Jones, play a pretty big role as well, but both of them did have major injuries last year, and there have been points where neither of them have really seemed totally full strength this year, so Raheem Jarrett has kind of been that focal point, that top play in the offense. Mike Loxley said this week that he's expected to be a game-time decision. So if they don't have him, I would expect them to probably lean on their tight ends a little bit more. We might be seeing more of the Maryland running game, which the Maryland running game is a little under the radar. It's maybe not the best in the Big Ten, but it's an underrated factor in this offense.
This Penn State team has a lot of Maryland guys on it, and Chop Robinson, a former Terp himself. How was that storyline really being received there in College Park?
Well, I covered Chop back in high school. He was a big-time recruit, as you know. When he chose Maryland, the Terps were very excited about that. I know a lot of the guys on the team now still keep in touch with him. But when he left, it might have left a sour taste in the program's mouth as a whole. Especially Mike Loxley, I know, was a little bit disappointed when he moved on to Penn State. So, there's definitely a little bit of rivalry here. You remember years back when Maryland went up to Penn State, or when they played and the Terps refused to shake hands with Penn State. So it kind of goes back to all that since Maryland joined the Big Ten about 8 years ago. But Mike Loxley was asked this week, about this rivalry matchup, and he said you can't quite call it a rivalry because Maryland's not quite at the level that Penn State is at. He says you got to play better to have a rival like that. So I think that is a big factor in this too, that Maryland, they're really trying to build their program up. And I think they're not at the point yet where they can maybe put themselves in the same category as the Penn States, the Michigans, Ohio States of the conference.
Yeah, I'm a big fan. If you're not going to shake someone's hand, don't do it on the road. That's just an invitation to a good old-fashioned butt whooping, but that's neither here nor there. This is a growing program, though. Maryland is certainly a program that's trying to catch a little bit of footing. I think you see it this year with a team that's going to have at least a 500 or better season. Where is this program kind of in its build, as you said, trying to chase, that upper echelon team in the Big Ten?
Yeah, I mean, this program has been through a lot in the last 10, 15 years or so. Obviously, the whole situation with DJ Durkin and the years they had Randy Edsall as the head coach, and there were a lot of struggles in there. But I think Loxley, who was an assistant when Ralph Friedgen was leading this program back in the ACC, he's kind of brought it back to what it was then, and maybe even a step further than that. I mean, I think he's turned them into a perennial bowl game team. He wants to turn them into a team that one day can compete for the college football playoff once it's expanded to 12 teams. So this program has made a lot of strides. They're winning games this year that maybe they wouldn't have won in the past. They're looking stronger than they have since before Loxley. But like I said before, they're still not quite exactly where they want to be. This year they had a big game against Purdue at home. Last week they played Wisconsin. They lost both of those games. Those are two games this program wanted to win, and two games where if they had won, we probably would have seen them ranked in the top 25 after those games this season. So I think this team is hungry, and I think they're going to come in hungry this week to beat Penn State, because they know that a win like this, obviously they beat them in the COVID season, but they want to beat them in a season with a packed house, get a quality Big Ten road win, and improve their standing and maybe grow this rivalry too.
Arguably could be one of Penn State's better wins too if the Nittany Lions can come out on top here on Saturday. He is Alex Flum from DC News Now. Alex, I appreciate you joining me. When we come back, we're going to wrap up this show, our keys to the game and players to watch. You're watching Nittany Nation Game Day.
Watch Nittany Nation Game Day on these great stations every week. WFXP in Erie, WHTM in Harrisburg, WPHL in Philadelphia, WYOU in Wilkes-Barre, DC News Now in Washington, and WTAJ in Altoona.
You're watching Nittany Nation Game Day.
This week's Nittany Nation Rewind has a familiar feel. Jahan Dotson last year at Maryland set the program receiving record. In a 31-14 win in College Park, Dotson caught 11 passes for 242 yards and 3 touchdowns, the final of which went for 86 yards and gave Penn State a 21-14 lead there in the third quarter. Anderly, I don't know if a 200-yard receiver is coming out of this one today, but maybe. Anyways, let's close it out with our keys to the game. Anderly, why don't you kick us off?
My key goes back to something we talked about earlier in the show, and that's making a New Year's Six Bowl, and that starts with winning now. This isn't a bad Maryland team, so don't get caught overlooking them.
I'm going to go with something I said last week. Bad weather, injured offensive line, just run the ball. Last week, Wisconsin ran for more than 200 yards in the first quarter alone against this Maryland team. Penn State needs to go right at them. And in that same stream of thought, I'm thinking Katron Allen or Nick Singleton here for my player to watch, and I'm going to go with the latter. Wisconsin had 3 rushes of 30-plus yards last week. That's a category Nick Singleton leads the Big Ten in. He could make a big splash today.
Safe to say that's his specialty there. And I'm going to go with Theo Johnson. Penn State has really utilized its tight ends in the red zone this year, and they account for half of the receiving touchdowns. Theo Johnson has a hot hand with 2 scores in the last 3 games, and I want to see the offense utilize that big body.
And before we go, let's take a look at some Nittany Lions in the NFL. Saints punter Blake
Gillikin there.
Blake Gillikin there, deleted word in the prompter, my fault. Down the pair inside the 20. In New Orleans lost to the Ravens. The Penn State Punter Bowl, you might actually call that game, because the guy on the other side of the sideline was Jordan Stout. You remember him.
Yeah, just casually.
Yeah, he booted a 67-yarder in that game. And this week on Thursday Night Football, we saw Falcons rookie Arnold Ebiketie with 3 tackles and a half sack in Atlanta's loss to Carolina. Of course, with that, Annalie, we are out of time. Penn State and Maryland on Fox at 3:30. Nittany Lions looking to move to 8-2 on the season. As always, we appreciate you joining us each and every week. For Annalie Penwell, I'm Andrew Clay. Enjoy the game.